Hi, everyone. I'm Paula Harvey of Tejon Ranch Conservancy. And today we're going to do the first in a series of drawing lessons. So this lesson is not one that goes in your journal. This is just the beginning of several short lessons on drawing. A lot of people will say, I can't do nature journaling because I'm not an artist. I can't draw. Well, I hope by now you realize that nature journaling isn't about being an artist. A lot of people who are artists love to do nature journaling because they like to paint or draw things in nature. But nature journaling in itself is much more of an activity in science than it is in art. And remember that we do three things when we're doing nature journaling. We're doing ABCs, which is the writing part of it. We do the 1, 2, 3s, which is the measuring part of it. And then we do a drawing, sketch, or diagram. So it's only one part of what nature journaling is. Now, that said, the better you are at drawing, the more satisfied you're going to be with your study. And so we're going to start with a type of drawing called observational drawing. This lesson is just going to show you the step-by-step process of drawing. Now, when you're doing that, you want to experiment with this process. There may be things that you want to change the order of, or you might want to modify the way you do one of those steps. That's completely up to you. So let's get started taking a look at what those steps are so that you can start applying that to your actual nature journaling practice. Step 1 in observational drawing is to observe. This is the backbone. It's the foundation. It is so important for that accurate drawing. And that is very specific and it's very careful observation. Now, it's easy to start that drawing way too soon and to get focused on what you've got on your paper or the way you think that a subject should look rather than the way it actually does look. So the first thing I'm going to tell you is take your time. Sit down, spend 2 to 5 very quiet minutes just looking at your subject. Now, this observational drawing is not something that you're going to do if you are drawing an animal in motion. That's a totally different kind of drawing skill, and we will address that later. But right now, we're just talking about taking your time, observing, and then drawing what you actually see. Remember, nature journaling is all about improving your observation skills. So now's the time to take a look at what you're seeing and talk about it out loud before you even start drawing. Talk about what you're seeing. Don't just be silent as you're observing, but be very specific and be able to hear what you're saying. You want to make observations about the shapes of things. Think about geometric shapes and how they apply to what you're looking at. Any angles, the proportions, relative measurements, such as how big the size of the head of something is compared to the rest of its body, or where the structures are attached to other parts of the subject. And you want to do all of this before you even start using a pencil. Now, step 2, it's the very first step. You're going to use the very lightest possible gesture lines that you can. So as an example, we are looking at a leaf that has leaflets in it, but the overall basic shape of this leaf is actually this oval. And so you're going to take a look at that, draw that, and you also want to draw where the apex of those leaflets join, which is right up here. It's not smack in the middle of the circle, but up here at the point of that oval. You want to use either a non-photo blue pencil, which draws very, very, very lightly, or a really light pencil, either very hard graphite, or you're just going to draw very lightly. Now, this is a framework or a ghost drawing, and it's used as scaffolding, something, the skeleton of which you're going to hang on those details. And so you want to start with that central axis, and then you want to create that tilt of whatever it is that you're drawing. And you want to do it with fluid strokes. So not small little strokes, but if you can, really continuous lines. One stroke, more than several. We'll take a look at this drawing. We have that oval, we've got that axis. And then here we've drawn these related radiating lines that go out to each of the spots on that oval. And then we're going to add these rough ovals and these points, which are going to be, again, that scaffolding for the actual picture of this leaf. So continuing with this step 2, you want to add general proportions, that is the height versus its width, the relative size of the major parts of the object, and relative means how it relates to the other parts of the object. So the relative size of each of these leaflets, for example. And then you want to use a prominent feature such as the head length to make certain kinds of measurements. Here's an example. If you look at a bird and you look at its head and make that head be a measure, you could say the body of that bird is 2.5 times the width of that head. That's what that means. The next thing you want to do is create some negative shapes. Those are the shapes of the spaces around that object rather than the actual object itself. So those negative shapes are carved in those angles that those negative shapes create right here between each of those leaflets. So you're blocking in the basic shapes, and then you're also showing those negative shapes. Step 3. This is so important. This is the one that a lot of people skip and they regret it at the very end. So once you've finished with that basic shape, and remember you're doing it very, very lightly, you can almost barely see it on paper. You want to check that shape, look at the proportions, look at those negative shapes, the measurements, the angles of your drawing. Look at all of it. Go back and keep looking at your subject, then at your drawing, and then at your subject, then at your drawing, and correct any of those inaccuracies that you see before you move on. This is the time to correct anything that's not quite accurate. This is not about mistakes. This is about accuracy. Now, it's really important, but it's the one that drawers of all levels of ability are most likely to skip. And it's only when the drawing is complete that a person's going to back off and they're going to look and say, oh my goodness, I made the head too big, or the negative space and the angles are not correct. The legs are too long. These sorts of problems are fixed so easily at this stage when you have very light pencil lines. In fact, you don't even have to use an eraser. All you have to do is draw a new set of correct lines over those existing ones. But once you have passed this and you start putting darker, more intense lines down on the page, you're not going to want to erase those. And so you're going to try and convince yourself that you were correct. So don't skip step 3. It's vitally important. Step 4, draw on top of those basic shapes. So now you've made those corrections. Now you've got correct lines on which you're going to draw some more prominent lines. You're going to use a regular graphite pencil or pen, and you're going to deliberately draw on top of that light framework. You're going to define the edges, the contours, and the form. You want to alternate between seeing the shape of the subject and the shapes of the negative space around and within that subject. Very, very important. Not only are you looking at that shape here, but you're looking at this shape in here. That's the negative space. Those negative spaces are very important. As the drawing progresses, use more pressure, adding accents, reinforcing those key lines and parts of that foreground, the foreground being what's in front. Vary the boldness of your lines. Don't try and make every single line equally bold. Step 5, now you're going to clean up. This is the time you can pull out that eraser and clean up any excess lines that you can see. Notice this is step 5. This is not step 1 or step 2. This is way into a 10-step drawing lesson. So now's the time you can use an eraser. Note, though, that this erasing comes very late, and it's a different technique than draw a little, erase a little, draw a little, erase a little. You can use that approach, but it's not going to be as effective as saving that erasing until now. Erasing at the end is all about calling attention to those intentional lines that you have drawn throughout this very slow, meaningful process. Step 6, you're going to start adding value. Now, value is going to be things like texture and darkness and shading and lighting. So many artists simply color a drawing from here, and that can kind of look like a flat coloring book kind of thing. Don't want to do that. To get those details, you want to put in the values. Those are patterns of dark and light. And it's more important than matching the accuracy of the color. Squint at both of your subject and then at your drawing and kind of blur those details to help your brain focus just on value, darks and lights. Shade in the darkest area and the middle tones. So notice right over here, it says fill in areas of value with smooth strokes. So notice there's smooth strokes here. You can kind of see those. And then it says, leave lighter areas unshaded. So if an area is brighter because the sun is shining on it or it doesn't have any shading on it, just keep it light. Don't put any color in there at all. And then create contrasting areas of value that suggest texture and form by erasing highlights and deepening shadows with your pencil. So if you take a look at some of these light spots here, that's done by an eraser. And then the darker spots is just by shading a bit. Next, you're going to add color. So once those values have been defined in step 6, it's now time to tint them with color. Now, some people use watercolor and some people use pencil. Personally, I use pencil. As you get more experience, you can start to apply both value and color at the exact same time. But start with the value and then go with color. So either you're going to wash with watercolor or layer with colored pencils. And layer means, might not be able to completely match that color of green, but a little green, a little brown, a little gray, and you're coloring over each other. That's what we're talking about, layering. And then, so color over that shaded sketch. The value of the toned regions should show through. So the values here, the darks and the lights. You don't need to finish any drawing. Focus on showing the most important and interesting information in your drawing. There's a difference between finishing a drawing and finishing a journal entry. We'll talk more about that. So step 8, add more detail. Take a look at this leaf. Notice it looks shiny over here. There's actually, it's been erased a little bit more. And then the value, the middle tones in between it, give it that texture. And the darker tones right over here, give it a sense of being folded and shaded. So think of detail as kind of the spice that you add to the stew at the end to get just the right seasoning and the accurate flavor. If you add detail too early in the drawing, it gets obscured, it gets covered up by the shading, the coloring, erasing, or even the smudging that naturally happens when you're drawing. Add more detail with a sharp graphite pencil and put detail in areas of focus and interest and in the foreground. So areas that you want to show, for example, you really want to show the details here, but also things that are closer, you're going to put more detail in. Things that are further away, you're going to put less detail in. If you take a look at this drawing, doesn't it look like this this leaf is farther behind the other leaves, not only because this leaf is layered above it, but also because it doesn't have any of the detail in it. Now, when you're doing that, this is going to guide the viewer's eyes to this spot right here. Your eye's going to go right to that. And that is exactly what you as the artist intended. You wanted people to focus on that particular detail. If you put detail everywhere in your drawing, it flattens your drawing. It does exactly the opposite. So don't put details in everything. Just focus on one thing. Notice that we started with just this drawing and we added a little more here, even more here, and then finally here. That's the steps that go into drawing this, but also notice that you don't need all the details that are in this one leaf. Add a little bit of detail to those areas of focus and interest or parts of the drawing that are in that foreground. Step 9, stop. Don't overwork your drawing. This is a tough one. It's kind of a fun step to stop doing work, but it's hard sometimes to know when to stop. A drawing that's partially complete is far more interesting than one that has been overworked. It's ruined. One rule of thumb to stop drawing is just before you think you're done, stop. Don't finish it. A partially complete drawing is not the same as an incomplete journal entry. Your purpose in drawing in nature journaling is to get some observational detail down, just like you do when you write it and just like you do when you measure it. ABC, 1, 2, 3, and the drawing. So once you've got those details down, you're done. This is not a drawing that is going to go into a museum. This is information that helps complete that journal entry. So remember this last one. An incomplete drawing is not the same thing as an incomplete journal entry. And then the last step, it's the fun one. Start all over, make another drawing, do this process over and over and over again. Each time you do it, you're going to get better. There is no end. There is no masterpiece. That's not the purpose of nature journaling. It's just open-ended practice and ongoing learning. The more you draw, the better you're going to get. And that's it. That's your first drawing lesson. Very simple. Go out and practice those steps and enjoy yourself. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you with the next lesson. Bye.